Tonight we'll explore the luminous world of stained glass windows, those remarkable creations that have filled sacred spaces with colored light for over 1,000 years. When sunlight passes through a stained glass window, something magical happens. The ordinary light of day is transformed into something else entirely, broken into colors, scattered into patterns, cast across floors and walls in shifting pools of red and blue and gold. This transformation has moved people for centuries, drawing their eyes upward, filling them with wonder. The story of stained glass begins not in the great cathedrals of Europe, but in the ancient world, where glassmakers first learned to add color to their craft. Glass itself is one of humanity's oldest manufactured materials. The Egyptians made glass beads and vessels 3,000 years before the Common Era. The Romans developed glass blowing and created windows of crude, thick glass for their buildings, but colored glass, glass deliberately tinted with minerals and metals, was known from the beginning. The ancient glassmakers discovered that adding certain substances to molten glass would change its color. Copper produced turquoise and red, cobalt made deep blue, iron gave green or brown depending on the conditions, manganese created purple. Gold in tiny amounts produced a distinctive ruby red. These discoveries were made by trial and error, passed down through generations of craftspeople. The earliest stained glass windows that survive today date from the early medieval period, though written sources describe colored glass in church windows even earlier. By the 7th century, monasteries in England and France were installing windows of colored glass, pieced together to form simple patterns. These early windows were crude by later standards, but they established the basic technique that would be refined over centuries. The technique itself is elegantly simple in concept, though demanding in execution. Pieces of colored glass are cut to shape and assembled in a framework of lead strips. The lead strips, called cames, hold the glass pieces together while allowing a degree of flexibility that rigid materials would not permit. The assembled panel is then waterproofed and installed in a stone or wooden frame. Let us follow the creation of a stained glass window from beginning to end. The process begins with a design. In the medieval period, the designer or master glazier would create a full-scale drawing on a whitewashed table or on parchment. This drawing, called a cartoon, showed every detail of the finished window, the figures and scenes, the decorative borders, the precise shapes of each piece of glass. The cartoon served as a template for cutting the glass. Workers would lay pieces of colored glass over the drawing and trace the outlines, then cut the glass to match. Cutting was done with a heated iron point, which could crack the glass along a controlled line. Later, diamond-tipped tools made cutting easier and more precise. The choice of colors was crucial. Medieval glaziers had a limited palette to work with, but within those limits they achieved remarkable effects. The deep blue of Chartres Cathedral, created with cobalt, has never been exactly replicated. The ruby reds of Canterbury required precise control of the gold and copper compounds that produced the color. Each workshop had its secrets, its preferred recipes, its accumulated knowledge of how to achieve particular effects. Once the pieces were cut, the painter's work began. Many stained glass windows include painted details, faces, hands, folds of cloth, architectural elements. This paint, made from ground glass mixed with iron oxide, was applied with brushes and then fired in a kiln. The heat fused the paint permanently to the glass surface, creating details that would last for centuries. The painting required considerable skill. Working on colored glass presented challenges different from painting on canvas or wall. The artist had to imagine how the colors would appear when light shone through them, how the lead lines would divide the image, how the viewer would perceive the whole from a distance. The painted pieces were fired in kilns at temperatures high enough to fuse the paint, but low enough to avoid distorting the glass. The process was delicate. Overfiring could ruin the glass entirely. Underfiring would leave the paint fragile and easily worn away. The kilnmaster's judgment was essential to success. After painting and firing, the pieces were assembled using lead cames. These H-shaped strips of lead were bent to follow the contours of the glass, their channels holding each piece securely. The glazier would work systematically across the panel, fitting piece after piece, securing each with the soft, malleable lead. Where the lead strips met, they were soldered together, creating a strong network that held the entire panel rigid. The soldering had to be done carefully. Too much heat would melt the lead instead of just joining it. Too little would leave a weak joint that might fail over time. Once assembled, the panel was waterproofed with a cement made from linseed oil and whiting, pressed into the gaps between lead and glass. This cement dried hard, sealing out water and adding strength to the structure. Finally, the panel was cleaned, polished, and installed in its window opening. Installation was itself a delicate operation. The panels were heavy and fragile. They had to be lifted to considerable heights and fitted precisely into stone frames. Workers used scaffolding and ropes, easing each panel into position with care. A slip could shatter months of work. A misalignment could stress the lead and cause cracks to develop over time. The medieval workshops that produced stained glass were organized along guild lines. Master glaziers supervised the work, trained apprentices, and maintained the standards of the craft. Journeymen handled the skilled tasks of cutting, painting, and assembly. Laborers mixed the putty, tended the fires, and cleaned the workspace. The production of a single great window might take years, employing dozens of workers. The glass itself came from glass houses, often located near forests that provided fuel for the furnaces. The glassmaker would melt sand with wood ash and other materials in a clay crucible, adding the metal oxides that produced color. The molten glass would be gathered on the end of a blowpipe and blown into a cylinder, which would then be cut along its length and flattened into a sheet. These sheets, called crown glass or muff glass, provided the raw material for the glaziers. Each batch of glass was slightly different. The color might vary from one melt to the next. Bubbles and imperfections were common. The medieval glaziers embraced these variations, using them to add visual interest. A face might be painted on glass with subtle striations that gave it life. A robe might be cut from glass with natural variations that suggested folds of cloth. The imperfections of handmade glass became assets rather than liabilities. The great age of stained glass was the 12th and 13th centuries, when the Gothic cathedrals of Europe rose toward the sky. Gothic architecture, with its pointed arches and flying buttresses, allowed for walls filled with windows rather than solid stone. The builders took advantage of this possibility, filling their churches with vast expanses of colored glass. The Cathedral of Chartres contains over 20,000 square feet of stained glass, most of it original to the 13th century. The windows tell stories from the Bible, from the lives of saints, from the daily life of medieval craftspeople who donated windows as acts of piety. Looking up at these windows, we see the medieval world as it saw itself, illuminated by the same light that has passed through the same glass for 800 years. The windows of this period achieved effects of color and light that have never been surpassed. The famous blue of Chartres, created by subtle variations in the thickness of the glass and the precise mixture of cobalt, seems to glow with an inner light. The reds and purples complement and contrast, creating visual harmonies that draw the eye across the vast windows. The subjects of medieval stained glass were primarily religious. Biblical scenes, images of Christ and the Virgin Mary, portraits of saints and prophets filled the windows of churches and cathedrals, but secular themes appeared as well, particularly in the smaller windows of the lower levels. Craftsmen and guilds commissioned windows showing their trades, bakers baking bread, weavers at their looms, vintners pressing grapes. These images provide invaluable records of medieval working life. The rose windows of Gothic cathedrals represent the supreme achievement of the medium. These circular windows, often 30 or 40 feet in diameter, were filled with intricate patterns of colored glass radiating from a central point. The rose window of Notre Dame de Paris, the great roses of Chartres, the rose of Reims, these are among the most magnificent works of art ever created. Creating a rose window required extraordinary precision. The tracery, the stone framework that held the glass, had to be carved with perfect symmetry. The glass panels had to fit exactly into their stone surrounds. The colors had to balance around the circle, neither too heavy in one area nor too light in another. The whole had to read as a unified design from 100 feet below, while also rewarding close inspection with its details. The Black Death of the 14th century and the religious and political upheavals that followed disrupted the craft of stained glass. Fewer new cathedrals were built. The great workshops dwindled. Skills that had been passed down for generations were lost. The stained glass of the later medieval period, though still accomplished, rarely matched the transcendent quality of the 13th century work. The Renaissance brought new techniques, but also new priorities. Oil painting on canvas became the dominant artistic medium. Stained glass was increasingly treated as a form of painting on glass, rather than a medium with its own unique properties. Windows became more pictorial, with more painted detail and less reliance on the inherent color of the glass. The Protestant Reformation dealt stained glass a severe blow in Northern Europe. Reformers saw elaborate church decoration as idolatrous. In England, the Netherlands, and elsewhere, mobs smashed medieval windows, destroying in hours what had taken decades to create. The fragments that survived were often carted away as rubble. Only a fraction of the medieval stained glass that once existed has survived to the present day. In Catholic countries, stained glass continued, though the style evolved. Baroque and Rococo windows favored clear glass with painted decorations, allowing more light into churches while still providing visual interest. The deep, jewel-like colors of the medieval period gave way to lighter palettes and more naturalistic imagery. The 19th century saw a revival of interest in medieval stained glass. The Gothic revival movement in architecture created demand for new windows in the old style. Craftsmen studied the surviving medieval examples, analyzed their techniques, experimented with recreating their effects. Workshops in England, France, Germany, and America produced stained glass for new churches and for the restoration of damaged medieval buildings. Some of the greatest artists of the era contributed designs for stained glass. The pre-Raphaelite painters in England, including Edward Burne-Jones and William Morris, created windows of remarkable beauty. Their figures have a dreamy, poetic quality quite different from medieval work, but their command of color and composition was genuine. In America, Louis Comfort Tiffany developed new techniques for working with glass. His opalescent glass, with its swirling colors and varied textures, departed entirely from the medieval tradition. Tiffany windows are immediately recognizable for their organic forms, their landscapes and flowers, their use of glass as a medium of color rather than a support for painted images. The 20th century brought further experimentation. Artists like Marc Chagall and Henri Matisse designed windows that brought modern sensibilities to the ancient medium. Chagall's windows at the Hadassah Medical Center in Jerusalem, with their dreamlike imagery and brilliant colors, show what stained glass could become in the hands of a master painter. Contemporary stained glass artists continue to explore the possibilities of the medium. Some work in traditional techniques, creating windows that would be at home in a medieval cathedral. Others push the boundaries, incorporating new materials, new technologies, new ways of manipulating light and color. Dichroic glass, which changes color depending on the viewing angle, creates effects the medieval masters never imagined. Fused glass techniques allow for textures and forms impossible in traditional work. The ancient craft remains vital, still capable of inspiring wonder. The restoration and conservation of historic stained glass has become a specialized field in its own right. Centuries of exposure to weather, pollution, and simple aging take their toll on even the finest medieval windows. The lead stretches and sags, the glass corrodes, its surface pitting and hazing, the paint flakes away. Without intervention, the windows would eventually fail entirely. Conservators work with painstaking care to preserve these treasures. They photograph and document every detail before beginning. They disassemble panels piece by piece, cleaning each fragment, replacing damaged leads, consolidating fragile paint. They may install protective glazing outside the original window, shielding it from weather while still allowing light to pass. The goal is always to preserve as much original material as possible while ensuring the window can survive for another century. Some of the most ambitious conservation projects have involved entire cathedrals. At Canterbury, at York, at Chartres, decades-long campaigns have stabilized and restored windows that were on the verge of collapse. The work is slow and expensive, but the alternative, losing these irreplaceable works, is unthinkable. New stained glass continues to be created for religious buildings worldwide. Churches and temples, synagogues and mosques have all incorporated colored glass into their architecture. Each tradition brings its own aesthetic sensibilities. Islamic stained glass uses geometric patterns rather than figurative imagery. Jewish windows might incorporate Hebrew text and symbols of the Torah. Modern Christian windows range from abstract compositions to traditional depictions of biblical scenes. Secular buildings have embraced stained glass as well. Railway stations and courthouses, libraries and private homes have all incorporated colored glass into their designs. The technique that began in churches has spread throughout the built environment, bringing color and light to spaces both public and private. Let us think about what stained glass does to light and why it moves us so deeply. When sunlight passes through colored glass, it is filtered. Certain wavelengths are absorbed while others pass through. The transmitted light carries only part of the spectrum, giving it its distinctive hue. This colored light falls upon surfaces within the building, dyeing them with its tint. The effect changes throughout the day. Morning light comes from the east, evening light from the west. The angle of the sun shifts with the seasons. Clouds passing overhead modulate the intensity. A stained glass window is never quite the same from one moment to the next. It is a living thing, responding to the rhythms of the sky. In a Gothic cathedral, the light from the windows fills the space with a kind of atmosphere. The air itself seems to glow. Colors mix and mingle as they fall on stone and floor. The darkness that remains intensifies the effect of the light, creating a drama of illumination that no other architecture achieves. There is also the effect of looking at the windows themselves, of seeing the light coming through rather than light falling upon surfaces. The glass becomes luminous, glowing with an intensity that painted surfaces cannot match. The colors seem to exist within the glass, not on its surface. They appear pure, untainted by the dulling effects of reflected light. Medieval theologians saw a symbolic meaning in this transformation of light. The glass represented the Virgin Mary, through whom divine light passed into the world. The colored light represented the grace of God entering the church to illuminate the faithful. The window was a meditation on the incarnation, on the meeting of heaven and earth. Whether or not we share these beliefs, we can appreciate the experience they sought to create. Entering a great cathedral filled with stained glass light is unlike entering any other kind of building. The ordinary world is left behind. Something different prevails, something quieter and more contemplative. The light itself becomes a presence. The craftspeople who made these windows understood their medium with extraordinary depth. They knew how colors would interact, how lead lines would structure a composition, how scale and viewing distance would affect perception. They understood that a figure seen from 60 feet below needed to be painted differently than one seen at arm's length. They knew how to use the lead lines not merely as structural necessities, but as design elements, outlining forms and creating rhythm across the surface of the window. They also understood the relationships between windows within a single building. A Gothic cathedral might have dozens of windows, and all of them had to work together. Colors had to balance around the space. Subjects had to be arranged in meaningful sequences. The overall effect had to be harmonious, even as each individual window told its own story. This required not just artistic skill, but careful planning, coordination among multiple workshops, and a shared vision of the whole. The lead lines themselves contribute to the character of stained glass. Unlike a painted image on canvas, a stained glass composition is visibly divided by dark lines. These lines could be a limitation, but in the best work they become an asset. They create a rhythm across the surface. They outline forms and suggest movement. They give the images a graphic quality quite different from painting. The medieval glaziers embraced this quality, making the lead lines an integral part of their designs. The thickness of medieval glass also affected the appearance of windows. The handmade glass was not uniform. Thicker areas appeared darker, thinner areas lighter. This variation created subtle gradations within each piece, giving depth and interest to what might otherwise be flat areas of color. Modern machine-made glass, though more uniform, lacks this quality. Reproductions made with modern glass, however technically accurate, rarely capture the depth of medieval originals. Many of these craftspeople remain anonymous. We know the names of a few master glaziers, but most of the workers who cut the glass, painted the details, assembled the panels, and installed the windows left no record. Their work survives, but they themselves have vanished into history. Perhaps this anonymity is fitting. The windows were made not for personal glory, but for the glory of God, for the enrichment of communal worship space. The craftspeople saw themselves as servants of a larger purpose. Their hands shaped the glass, but the light that passed through came from beyond any human source. Tonight, as you rest, perhaps you can imagine yourself inside a great cathedral on a sunny afternoon. The light streams through the windows, casting pools of color on the stone floor. Dust motes drift through the beams, catching the light and disappearing. The silence is profound, broken only by the occasional footstep of a visitor, the distant sound of pigeons on the roof. You sit in a pew and let the light wash over you. Red and blue and gold fall upon your hands, upon your face, upon the wood of the seat beside you. Above you, the rose window blazes with color, its patterns radiating outward like a flower made of light. The saints in the tall lancet windows gaze down with serene expressions, their robes glowing with colors no earthly dye could match. The stories they tell are ancient, but the light that reveals them is new each moment. You notice details you might have missed on a quicker visit. The way one panel of glass is slightly different in color from its neighbor. The fine lines of paint that define a face or a hand. The way the lead lines follow the contours of the figures, emphasizing their shapes. Each window rewards patient attention, revealing more the longer you look. A child walks past, head tilted back, mouth open in wonder. For a moment you see the windows through fresh eyes, as if for the first time. The colors are brighter, the scale more impressive, the whole effect more magical. The child moves on, but the sense of wonder lingers. Outside, clouds drift across the sun. The light dims, then brightens again. The colors shift subtly, pulse gently, breathe with the passage of the day. The window is alive with light, and through it the light finds you, touches you, offers itself to your contemplation. The craftspeople who made these windows have been gone for centuries. Their hands have long since turned to dust, but their work remains, still catching the light, still transforming it, still offering it as a gift to all who enter and look upward. The glass is fragile, yet it has endured. Wars and weather, neglect and accident have claimed many windows, but many more survive. Each surviving window is a testament to the care of those who made it and those who have preserved it across the generations. In the quiet of the evening, as the last light fades from the sky, the windows grow dim, the colors darken, the figures become silhouettes against the glow of sunset. Soon they will be invisible, waiting for dawn to bring them back to life. And tomorrow the sun will rise again, and the light will find the windows again, and the ancient glass will glow again with colors that have not faded in 800 years. The gift continues, the light persists, the wonder remains. Somewhere in the world tonight, a master glazier is at work in a studio, cutting glass by the light of a lamp, following a pattern drawn on a table, just as glaziers have done for 1,000 years. The tools have improved slightly. The glass comes from factories rather than forest furnaces, but the essential work remains the same, taking colored glass, cutting it to shape, assembling it into images that will glow when the sun shines through. The tradition continues because the wonder continues. As long as people are moved by colored light, as long as they seek spaces that inspire contemplation and awe, there will be stained glass. The technique is ancient, but the effects are eternally fresh. Each new day brings new light, and the windows transform it as they have always done. The darkness gathers now, the windows are quiet. They wait for morning when they will blaze again with color. And you too wait for morning. But for now there is rest and darkness, and the memory of light passing through ancient glass, falling in colors upon the stone. Rest well.